And talk about social media. If you rail on social media, like social media is horrible, and they're all influencers. You want to grab attention, you gather like, but you may just be putting up a total persona to attract attention that may not speak to. Chances are it doesn't speak to your soul in a particular way, or it may well not. And then you feel like you get loved and get lots of likes because you say something weird, and then everybody likes you, so then you feel compelled. If you're an adolescent girl trying to navigate your relational value that way, it's not the right way of developing. So that just gives you an idea about, well, okay, if we had the right calibration about our natures, we could then cultivate the right kind of relational networks that afford them good calories, good relating calories, as opposed to bad relating calories. And we've set up a pretty bad relating calorie system.
Welcome to another episode of Unlatched Mind. I'm your host, Vinny Vallerine. My guest today is Dr. Greg Enriquez. Greg was on, he's been on twice prior to this episode, so this is actually his third time being on. He and I hit it off a while ago. I always love having great conversations with him. Greg and I were going to discuss one of the blogs he had co-authored, part of one of the Psychology Today blogs. The blog was focused on general collective intelligence. You would think with a global pandemic that affected us all equally, right? It had no racial bounds. It had no religious bounds. There was no divide in terms of the virus. It just attacked us as humans. You would think that would bring us together, and yet, at least in the United States, was immediately divisive, and you immediately had left versus right. You had, and I say this several times. I could tell who someone voted for whether or not they had a mask on, and that's just silly. It should not be the case, but it's just absolutely true. But anyway, the blog really talked about sort of how trying to solve problems and trying to understand and have some sort of collective understanding of a problem or some group decision. What are some of the key tenets of group decision making? How do you get in this case millions of people to sort of get on board with a consistent, common approach to solving a problem? And it gets really complicated. It really does. And that. And anyway, long story short, that led me to tag up with Greg again and do the podcast and do another episode. Long story short, we barely even talked about the article. So that's what I love about Greg. We just kind of went off. We started there as a jumping off point, and then talked about everything from social media to just political divisiveness to government, religion, faith, agnosticism, atheism, centralized moral compass, values, what, the big problem many of our worldly systems have set up, that are truly in contrast with our human nature, right? The core of the core of there is a common core in all of us. There's a common primal desire we all have. And and that's, and we talk about that, right? We talk about how we really need to be more in line with our core values and be doing things every day that speak to our core values and inspire us. We'll then be inspired, and then a lot of the problems that fall out of our fake personas just go away. But our systems are not set up for that. We're not incentivized for that. Call it capitalism, call it other isms. It doesn't matter. They all, few of them really motivate us to stay true to our core values and try to align us, try to incentivize us to stay true to our intrinsic values. They all actually do quite the opposite. So we talk quite a bit about that, and as humanity, our divergence from our core values. Anyway, it's a great conversation. It went all over the place. So anyway, let's jump in. Dr. Greg Enriquez. And Greg, this is the third time you've been on, and I appreciate it. So this is awesome. Thank you.
Hey man, thanks. Always love talking with you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, appreciate it. So we'll jump into like some of the notes I had with in the blog in a second, but I don't know. I found this blog like you said, and I think you had co-wrote it with, or you said it, Andy Williams, right? Was his name?
Andy Williams was the primary author on that blog.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. And okay. So we'll use that as a kind of a backdrop and see where it goes. I think I found, honestly, I ran into this blog after like 2 or 3 clicks after I typed something. Gosh, this was a couple of weeks ago. Whenever I originally reached out to you, I was trying to figure out how the hell we figure out why we're not coming together during this global pandemic. We're actually like getting more divided, right? Not really surprised, unfortunately, but and I don't know how many. It was only a couple clicks, and I ended up getting a Psychology Today for some things, and the next thing I know, I saw your name, and there was this, and here we are. And that was the backdrop to this whole thing. So I'm sure you have plenty to say on that topic, whether it's in the blog or not. I don't. It is what it is. But for me, as I'm reading through this, as reading through all the other content, it's nonstop politics. It's nonstop left versus right. It's this whole, and I think even last time we spoke, there's always these key tenets that jump out when I'm speaking to folks like you, and it's, tribalism. Have we evolved to be like this? Is there ways out of it? And I know you and your colleagues have been working on trying to quantify some of these things, and I don't know, I think you guys are all paddling upstream. I mean, in terms of, you have the political structure against you, and there's no money to be made in fixing everything, and you know what I mean?
Right. So our metaphor is that, at least my metaphor is that I'm a flea on a Titanic. So there's the basic. I don't have a whole lot of hope at that level.
It's unfortunate,
but I'll still bounce it around, do my little thing. But yeah, that's the stacked structural functional inertia / energy / what the actual forces on the ground are. It's a not a great. At that level, I certainly have hope and energy and all that.
Yeah,
stuff.
no, you certainly do.
Waves of what the momentum is and where we are is going to carry us quite forward down, quite long, down this path that we're actually in. So anybody that's thinking that 6 months from now we're going to flip the switch and all of a sudden we'll sort of wake up and see the light and come together. That doesn't make any sense to me, given my understanding of human behavior.
No, yeah, and it all comes out. I mean, we're all human, so our nature is what's going to determine what we do and how we think and all that. And it's just it's fascinating. I mean, you would think it's a global thing that could, at the time, we thought it could kill all of us, right? Obviously, it was a lot less crazy than that, thank God. But you would think that would just bring everyone together. No, immediately, and again, speaking mostly for our country in the U.S., that's what I know the most. I think everyone doubled down on the divisiveness. I could tell, and I always joke about with my friends this, I could tell someone's political leanings and who they voted for based on if they had 2 masks on, I knew who they voted for, and if they had no mask on, I knew who they voted for. It's like, and pretend possibly, I don't know what the statistics would be, but probably 90% accurate with that assessment. That's kind of silly.
Yeah, no.
It's kind of silly.
No, I think. But that's nope. Everything is a sort of an identity culture deal. We got 2 teams, and there are a lot of pressures to be put on one team and think one versus the other way. And that's the situation.
Taking a step back, I haven't spoken to you in quite a while. I'm sure you look at these things. You probably was observing the pandemic and our response to it through the lens, the psychology lens, and all the deep stuff that goes through your head. What are the big takeaways you have? I mean, is it like what's been going through your head over the past year plus?
Yeah. So first off, I'm not surprised. I think that virtually anything that's going to try to get movement on, people together is going to run up against an enormous amount of polarization. That's the infrastructure. The infrastructure is designed to polarize us. Look at infrastructure. Virtually everyone agrees that it behooves us all, and maybe we'll get some infrastructure bill passed. But even if you have massive amounts of agreement, the polarization's so high at the level of identity that people want to know what team you're on, and there are massive amounts of force to try to generate that leverage, and so that's going to create a lot of tension. And keep in mind that we're then oriented to see the tension, so it's a pretty vicious feedback loop. So the level of dysfunction or polarization or whatever was definitely not surprising to me. I wouldn't expect. It's hard for me to imagine. Maybe here's one thing: if we literally were attacked by aliens, aliens have been in the news. If we were attacked by aliens, maybe something like that, and there was an immediate threat for all of us, then some of the political polarization stuff, and you felt that a little bit occasionally. But generally, it's gonna if there's policy decisions to be made, identity issues, complicated data to try to sort through the power of the polarization. So for me, I feel very mixed. As I tell people, I'm on the one hand, the hopeful side of me, and my own life has been very positive in the sense that one thing that's come out of the pandemic that I think is good news, at least in terms of the space that I live, is an awakening. There is a real a fundamental shift in terms of the numbers of people that are starting to think, man, I don't know that we're on the right track. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and then the consciousness about maybe what we're doing and the game that we've been playing is not the right game to keep playing, is now very high relative to where it was, say, 5 years ago. So, so for example, the idea that I think we need a knowledge revolution. I think we need a whole kind of, new way of thinking. When everything's going fine, people are like, well, fuck that. It's like everything's all right. What the hell are you talking about? The idea that, oh my gosh, the Enlightenment sort of ran its course and we are bumping up against sort of what modernity did over the last 400 or 500 years, and now it's not going to continue on this path. That something fundamental needs to happen. The way we relate to the planet, the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to technology. That there is a fundamental sense, I think, that really needs to shift. And I think the pandemic, the one good thing that it did, because I believe it does need to shift, that is, I think that if we continue on the same basic course that was structured by capitalism, first off, I don't think that's really possible for a whole host of reasons. But I think that if we were to do that, I think we would run into a real serious set of problems. I think we will run into a serious set of problems. At the same time, to the extent that we wake up able to understand the situation we're in, able to have a wise vision for where we might go, and a number of people wake up to that, the collapse that we will face will be, qualitatively different potentially, and really allow us a transformation into a new way of living in the back half of the 21st century for a large number of people. I hope that that's possible. I think it is possible, and I see more and more people that are interested in that possibility and more open to it. So that's one sort of I'm not saying it's an even wash. The pandemic's been pretty brutal, but it's at least something that I've seen quite significant percolate through the consciousness in multiple different communities and multiple different places. So that's one good thing that I would say that I've seen.
It's something that challenged the normal. It challenged the norm. It challenged the assumption that everything, that this is just how life is. This is just how we do things, right? You just forget that those those mechanics that are in place that allow you to go to work, allow you to interface with your coworkers, allow you to, get to another country or assess someone's values and still be okay. Whatever the thing is, it's all sort of fragile. I mean, I remember feeling this way during 9/11, just kind of like, you just thought those towers would always be part of the skyline. Why wouldn't I? And then it challenges it's almost like the death of a loved one. Like I lost my dad last year, and it was kind of like, wait, and you have to, you get to a, or even the good stuff, like having children, like these monumental changes in your perspective that, for me, 44 now, it's like I just, for up until I would say a few years ago, well, maybe probably just before kids, you assume, for me, it's sort of like I just assumed there was this base foundation and you're just adding little bits of experience on top of it, and this is incremental growth in you as a person, and then something happens that changes your entire underlying understanding of reality. Right. And and then, I think that's sort of what you're kind of articulating. And it's
exactly. Yep. No, it's a cultural awakening. Right. So we wander around, we assume that we have a just world, we build the world, we have the assumptions. As long as everything's going on, we don't really question those assumptions, we operate within them. And then all of a sudden something fundamentally changes that changes the shape of the grip that our intuition has on ourself and the world and its relation. And when that grip changes, the foundation of it, then it's very disorienting. A lot of things, your assumptions melt, and then they're in a position of transition, and then they have to reconsolidate. And that can be a good thing, meaning that you can then sort of melt and then use that as a transformational opportunity. It also can be destructive. And with for Chinese, the word for crisis and opportunity is very similar, the same basic word. And so that's an interesting, and there's truth in that. So we basically experienced a crisis, an unpredictable crisis that then opened up all sorts of some trauma for a number of people, many people, of course, and then all sorts of changes. All of a sudden Zoom, becomes a reality in a particular kind of way. And then lots of awakening kinds of changes in relationship to, wait a minute, what are we doing? Of course, that makes people defensive. It makes people kind of judgmental, self towards others. And you can get into definitely neurotic. So subsets are going to be very sort of, oh no, and then get defensive and be fragile. And, that's a problem, of course. At the same time, some people also say, wait a minute, here's an opportunity for transformation. That's certainly the space that I live in. And I'm feeling that, or at least on the hopeful side of my psyche.
Yeah. And for me, it always goes down to, I think I asked you this last time or something to this effect. It's almost like we could sort of figure it out if we all... Do we, I guess maybe it's more of a question, do we all need to share some common set of values? And say take the globe. For us to really do something together, to really, I always go back to this. Call it moral relativism. I mean, I just feel like as we cross borders, sometimes there's some. I would think humanity has a basic set of values that underpins everything, no matter what your religious beliefs are. You would think, but at times I question that too. Like there's
sure.
Some of the differences go so deep. I'm thinking, well, maybe that group of people don't want, and they don't value life the way we do, or I don't value something the way they think I should. So that's what makes me real, I guess, I'm gonna say pessimistic, but not as optimistic that we eventually will all just come together. Your alien analogy is a good one, and it's kind of like, because they have been in the news more, and that's sort of what I thought when the coronavirus hit. Okay, regardless of where it started, right? I mean, I won't get into all that. It took over the whole world, shut down the world. And you think we'd be like, oh, crap, okay. But what happened was, certain countries locked down information, protecting their own, tribalism grew, and we're still kind of here. So it's like that. Yeah. I just don't know if that, what are your thoughts? I mean, do we need a common set of like a common moral compass for this to work, or can we? Sure.
I do. So I'm part of it's led by my friend, Professor Michael Mascolo. We developed, I'm a co-founder of this thing called Creating Common Ground. And it's a sort of organization, a platform, mode that at least looks at the processes by which systems can come together. And your insight or your question about the issue of values is really central to this. So central to the Creating Common Ground mode is get out of positions and into shared agreement about values. Is understand what problems that you face are rather than positions. So unlock yourself from positions and then start talking about problems. Then go down to values, and then work from there and realize you don't discover common ground, but you work together to then create it and then cultivate that in relation. So it's a process really of conflict resolution and the cultivation of particular sort of shared identities and investments that I think he delineates a particular way of going about it. And if you start with the idea that don't get yourself into a position, then you see, well, shit, that's what everybody does.
Right. That's the first thing you feel safe doing.
Shift,
yeah.
First thing that you do. So, but it does say, kind of pointing to your thing, is like, well, hey, what are needs? What are values? I actually do believe there's good evidence to suggest that at least when people are not sort of defending their interests in a particular way at a generalizable level, there are an enormous number of high-level values that people are oriented towards in a positive direction. Okay, the most consensual document ever across cultures that was developed is the United Declaration of Human Rights. The United Declaration of Human Rights came in 1948 on the heels of World War II, of course, and that was then like, shit, we got problems. Of course, they, in some ways, even bigger problems then. And they got together and they said, hey, we're creating this global society. And somewhere along the lines of 210 different cultures signed on, countries representing cultures across the globe, really, signed on to this document. And that's really remarkable. That's across all the different, domains. And you get a pretty good picture then of a level of consensus that's achievable. And the thing I like to point out is, although there was huge amounts of difference about specifics, it opens with the idea that about human dignity and human dignity in relationship to, hey, people have value, and people care about their lives. And it's crucial to have lives that we value, to treat people with respect, honor, and hold that. And then when you afford people that kind of value, that core respecting valued position at a fundamental level, then you can justify justice values, meaning, hey, what's fair? How do you treat people with particular levels of dignity? And across all cultures, you see that basic structure being something that people can buy in. It's like, yeah, we should value people. Now, of course, cultures differ. Historically, we differ tremendously about, well, is everybody included in that, right? Obviously, in conditions of slavery, and you go back to the Greeks, and it's like, well, actually, only, certain males in certain contexts really. But actually, now that the great modernity idea, at least, is that actually should be extended to everybody. And the vast majority of cultures have actually internalized that. And the current nation-state structures that work together actually have human dignity as at least as a stated value, okay? In terms of, to the extent that if you tried to operate as a state actor and you explicitly justified that, say, a subset of, women have no value, other humans have no value, you actually wouldn't be able to operate in the nation-state global structure. You actually have to profess that you do, or else you're a bad non-state actor. Okay, so there are infrastructures. People care about dignity. I discovered sort of three meta values that I try to emphasize that transcend culture. And the first is dignity. The second is well-being. People want to be able to function with fulfillment, and as opposed to dysfunction and distress across your biophysiological life, in your mental life, into your social relational world. That's pretty universal. Health concerns at the biopsychosocial level. People have a clear intuitive sense about that. People want to live healthy and happy lives. That's universal. And people care about truth. Every culture cares about lying in various ways, but they have a sense of what truth is. They generally value the truth. They want to know. And I call that integrity. So my big three values that I think are pretty universal and I think are really necessary for societies to play in a global stage are dignity, well-being, and integrity. And I sign off my signature line in my email as be that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity. And that's the way I sort of cultivate that. And so I do believe that, if the situation is right and people enter into the door not feeling threatened or attacked or having their traditions, that consensual agreement about those kinds of ideas is actually very much achievable. The real world's a lot more complicated, but at an abstract level, there are those kinds of values. And the other values like love and charity and things like that are also key concepts that many, many people believe in. So I'll
that's encouraging. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I think for now it's 2021, right? Folks all over the world can hear a conversation like this, hear you just express that, where maybe, 30 years ago even they couldn't do that. And they just knew what they knew, and the tribe stood in whatever, dogma that they were brought up to believe, whether destructive to the rest of humanity or not, or good, would be what the thing they would double down on. So I'm encouraged, as much as I trash a lot of technology and especially social media on this podcast often, because I think it's not really social media's fault or technology's fault. It's the people's abuse of it, But I think now that we can all communicate, just at the drop of a hat, I would hope that generally the progress will be there so folks can hear what you just said, and someone that maybe is in an oppressed society goes, oh my gosh, other folks think that all around the world. And then more, now maybe they're, they can't respond to it because they're in an oppressive society right away, but at least that, maybe their hope for that, is encouraged, and then maybe their children are able to actually break free. And it's like, because I do believe you're right. I think that core is in us, and it's just like there's been these dogmas and whatnot over the years. And I know I always say I think I asked you this a while ago, is how do you think religion affects all this? Because a lot of I call it the R word, because sometimes, like in my background and my upbringing, it's the Christian background. And traditionally it's there's mostly love preached, and there's some stuff in the Old Testament, but I don't know anyone that I grew up with that would use that as an excuse to do anything. It was generally a loving concept, and God loves you, and but there's other things that these other belief systems that I don't fully understand, but there's folks use that to justify some of the things they do. So it's like eventually maybe does that have to die off for folks to start to hear what you said and go, well, okay, I guess he's onto something, or is religion just a big giant blocker that'll eventually, I think I asked you last time, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think you had said religion was on the decline, and this was 2 years ago because I think you were literally my first or second podcast. I don't know if that trend's still continuing. I don't know if it's a good trend.
Oh, certainly within the. Well, it's a very complicated. I mean, this is a great question because religion. Many of the words we use, especially in these kinds of conversations, are called suitcase words. A suitcase word has many different facets to it. So it means thousands of different things.
Yep.
So to then try to make generalizations about something that means thousands of different things is very complicated.
Yeah.
But I certainly appreciate you raising this issue because it's very near and dear to my own heart. So at an empirical level, the answer is absolutely in the West. The United States right now is going through a dramatic transition towards the nones or secularism. So nones meaning I don't have a specific identified relationship with an established religious organization. So that's what the nones are, and you can people can be defined.
Probably going to think of a better name than that. I'm thinking of Catholic nuns.
Yeah, well, I mean that's just sort of fair enough. Sorry, that's definitely not that. It's NONE.
Got it.
Yeah. And so that's just the way statistically they get clustered because they're agnostics, they're atheists, they're spiritualists, but they're non-affiliated. And then they cluster them together. And then so behavioral social science people say, okay, well, it makes sense to put them in the non-religious category.
Gotcha.
And now let's watch what these guys are doing. And, I don't have the stats directly on me, but basically now if you were to say in the turn of the millennium 20 years ago, somewhere along the lines of maybe 30% of the population would have been in the United States in that category. I think right now it's maybe 50%. So it's almost doubled. It's by far the fastest growing group. All the other areas of identification are shrinking significantly. So the secularization of the United States over the last 20 years has been a major phenomenon. Now, this already pretty much happened in Europe. The majority of Europe basically is secular in terms of this kind of identity. But the United States wasn't, and it's changed dramatically in the last bit. Myself, I was raised as sort of in a Dawkins-esque, Richard Dawkins kind of new atheist household. I was pretty skeptical of religion at almost every level in terms of and critical of it in that kind of way. I am not nearly as critical of key facets of it in my later days as I used to be. I am very much of the belief that we need, essentially, my friend John Vervaeke and I talk about this in terms of a religion that's not a religion. Okay. And what we mean by really, there's the old term religio, which has to do with community and coming together and believing and having shared beliefs about what's true and good and cultivating in shared common ground what that is and feeling and developing an orientation toward the sacred through that process. I think we need that tremendously. Okay. What needs to happen is we need to figure out how to do that in what I would call a one world worldview. Okay, a one world worldview is sort of a naturalistic worldview, as opposed to a two world worldview. In simple terms, a two world worldview says, oh, there's the material world here, and that's and then you live, and then your soul goes to the second world of God. Okay, virtually all the old religions, although certainly the Eastern traditions are more complicated, but certainly in the West, the standard concrete everyday version is, hey, you have your life here, and then you get your second world with God and angels and so forth. The scientific worldview and the emergence of the liberal democratic modern worldview, well, that undercuts many people's capacity to authentically believe in that narrative. And indeed, so that narrative is not really kind of conceptually available to large numbers of people now. We can get into, is that a good, accurate argument or is not? But it's the fact of the matter is that science has undercut the worldview of a standard Judeo-Christian Islamic view. Okay, that was especially the concrete version of that worldview.
Right.
And so, with that authority being undermined, then the question is, then what happened essentially is there was a transition for a whole host into a materialistic, capital labor, produce, consume structure, and that had many great advantages, and it did lots of things like create the opportunity for me to live in this beautiful house, and ultimately talk to you on this really unbelievable technology. And at the same time, it basically turned Mother Earth into a capital production machine, so that we are now going through what's called the Anthropocene, which is that the human activity is so intense on the Earth that we're radically changing almost every facet you look at. Okay, we're basically turning the Earth into human technology, at least, and we're doing all the low-hanging fruit. And the trajectory of us at 8 billion people almost, which basically tripled over the last 65 years. I mean, it's 2 billion people, 60 years ago or something like that. I mean, this is the intensity and the demands that we make, the lives that, somebody like me leads, and you try to times that by 8 billion. It's just unbelievable and completely unsustainable at a particular level. So the worldview that we created was, okay, well, hey, live in this world. But then we created a way to live in this world that's consumptive, that's hedonic. It's also individualistic. It lacks appreciation for the sacred. And it creates then, in my estimation, all sorts of particular kinds of lifestyle problems that both are unsustainable at the level of resource consumption. And I think we're also seeing that they really hurt the human soul. And I can talk about how I mean about that in terms of a naturalistic sense. But actually, my mission is to hunt for a coherent naturalistic ontology, which means sort of an idea of what's real, in a way that revitalizes the human soul and spirit in the 21st century. And what I mean by soul in that context is the thing inside of you that gives you breath and that allows you to see. It's still a remarkable, wondrous miracle from God or from nature or wherever you want to put it. It's a miracle that we can actually somehow we see and feel and believe and have ideas. And we need to be oriented towards something that is, that is wise and good in the deepest and sort of most sustainable senses of those words. And I don't know that we know how to do that. And I'm very interested in trying to cultivate that. And that's really what a religion that's not a religion is. And a lot of my work and some of the people I'm working with would be at least to afford a philosophical structure that would engender that kind of belief system and then orient a worldview that I think would be a lot more fulfilling for many, many people.
Yeah, it's like you extracted the thing I think almost anyone would agree on is like the good, the I don't know, the I'll just say good for lack of a better term, the good tenets of each of the religions that, because there's a whole bunch of you kind of extract all of them. It's like, well, it's like you're kind of raising that above, or even, well, it's almost like you're just using that as the least common denominator between them all. And like, but without pulling in the, well, if you don't believe in this God by this name in this book, then you go somewhere bad, right?
Definitely.
You're taking that part out, which,
Right.
which if you look at it a big picture, you have to get to that point to really be, have that inclusive. We're all here together. Otherwise, you're going to have this massive divide. But I'll say, even from experience, that again, in there's varying degrees of this in my circles, both family and friends.
Sure.
Growing up, it's like some are just taking, like for the Christian belief system, for example, some will take it and just adhere to those good natural, just all the good stuff, love, and just love and live and let live and that kind of stuff. And it seems to be very pro people, pro humanity, pro society. And then I have other factions reading the same exact book saying, well, if you don't believe in this exact man called Jesus Christ, then you are not going to meet God in heaven. Right. And that's a specific example, and I can't speak to the other faiths because I haven't lived them. But
no, that's exactly right. Virtually all of the faiths have a concretized version. Okay, the concretized version, literal. Okay, like this is actually a reference to what really happened in a concrete way, and then some people buy that, and then other individuals buy the sort of metaphorical liminal.
Yes.
Metaphorical liminal mystical is the this means something sort of in its storied narrative that speaks to me in a particular way that calls forth something in me, and I don't need to make the concretized claims of it. It's just the way it orients me in the world that I know to be true, good, and beautiful. And so those differences, and you're up. That second one is pretty key at a global level, at a scientific level, across a wide variety of different reasons. I would say the shift to that liminal, mystical view and the spirit and the process of it, as opposed to, well, this is a concrete version of the truth in the fundamentalist way. Truth. That's a big difference. And for a global society to function, certainly people have the freedom to believe what they want, but at the global cosmopolitan level, it's pretty clear which kind of beliefs are going to be necessary for us to coordinate the 21st century global structures.
Yeah. It's a tough one because it's almost like you need the one half of that to explode and to grow, the half, if you will, of what you just articulated, and the other half, that's the fundamentals, that needs to sort of go away. Maybe it's respected, maybe it's used as metaphoric, and I know, folks, I have friends and family that will listen to this and go, wait a minute, are you not a Bible-believing Christian right now? I know I have people I love are thinking that when hearing me say that, and I'm just exploring here. We're exploring, everyone listening, so because that's a personal thing. You said it's personal to you. I mean, of course, it doesn't get much personal in this, right? I mean, we're going to die soon. Then what? You know what I mean? That's who doesn't have that question. I mean, when you're 20, we're all morons at 20. At least I was. You don't think about it, but you start getting up there. It's like, hey, what's next? So it's.
Yep. Yeah. No, my encouragement is, I just said I encourage folks to be sort of agnostic about the ultimate nature of reality. Okay. At one level, that's what I invite. If you're not agnostic about the ultimate reality, I'm a little curious about how you would know, relative to the 6 million other beliefs that other people know in relation and all the mysteries that, we've encountered. So at that level, I think a little humility and agnosticism. That doesn't mean that everyone should be an agnostic by any stretch, but I think that some degree of agnosticism in terms of ultimate capital T truths is an honest stance to take and often to be reminded of in relation. So, and I invite that for everybody from the Dawkins atheists to the fundamentalists. I mean, I think that at least that's an invitation that I offer folks. And then, the other thing that I try to help people see, or at least as a potential for where we may be heading, is we needed to be inside our systems of justification. We need to live inside of those, given the stage of cultural evolution that we were in. What does that mean? The system of justification is the belief value network that you're born into and get socialized into. Okay? And then you adopt, and then you bring yourself under that cultural ethic and code, and then you say, hey, I'm now part of that, and that's what I am. All right? And pre-modern man, lived this way and needed to live this way. And even for modernity, we need to build a certain kind of justification. I think actually we're going to need to figure out how to step laterally away from our systems of justification to see them and not give them up by any stretch, but to move so that we can kind of get meta around them, meaning like, oh, yeah, that's my belief system. Rather than, oh my God, that has to be everybody's belief system. It's like, hey, I have a system of justification. Yes, that's part of being human, and it's crucial. At the same time, in the global cosmopolitan world, there have been 6 million billion justification systems that people, people built them all over the place, and getting sort of adjacent to those as opposed to getting under them and feeling that they force a particular reality on you. I think that's a mindset that will be helpful if we can cultivate.
Observe yourself from that third person a little bit. That meta concept. Yeah, it's critical because it's like I made that analogy before talking to folks like you and whatever others over the past couple of years doing this podcast. I've always come to realize, and it may have been you that kicked it off way back when in my head. It's like, because you've said meta many times, and and I'm in the software industry, and metadata is data about the data. So you're stepping outside. It's very important. It's an important concept, but it's always like when you speak in the first person, you think in the first person, you can't see what you're seeing. You're just observing. You're inside of it. When you can see what you can see or hear what you can hear, then you step inside other people's shoes. So then you really start to understand how you're a cog in this whole thing, and how what you say affects others, and how what you perceiving, and how it's actually being perceived. That it's a powerful concept. I just think it escapes a lot of folks, but it is a powerful concept for sure. One thing that as you're talking, it's funny. I I've always been fascinated with folks like you who are, like a lot of these folks. I mean, and I know I asked this before, and I don't think you would claim you're an atheist, or you had a phrase you used last time.
Right. I'm actually I'm an agnostic, atheistic, syntheist of all things.
Okay.
So, sorry, I am a pretty weird, SOB. So I warn people, I'm way the hell out there. But and agnosticism, I already confessed what that is.
Sure.
Confessed to your listeners.
Yeah.
No, it's the basic. It's an openness, a wondering, and an uncertainty about the ultimate nature of reality, and saying that you don't have the God's eye truth on whatever that is. You're a human and limited, and so there's that. I'm atheistic in the sense that I'm without belief in a theistic God, a personal God that I have a personal relationship with. A number of atheists will point out that if you believe in one God, then you're atheistic in relationship to all the other gods. So you know what it's like to be an atheist. You just, I just happen to be atheistic towards one more God. A syntheist is an individual who believes in the concept of God. Okay. And that God is created in the image of man, and that actually we can do that in a very, very important way. We ought to do that in a particular kind of way. So it embraces the capacity to project an idealized, iconic structure that calls us towards an ultimate concern, towards an ultimate good, towards the potential of what the universe might be, and then shine back on you in relationship to the potential that you might engender. It affords an orientation towards what's potentially sacred. So a syntheist is somebody that looks at the sort of the theism of Christianity as a thesis, and then the atheism of the Dawkins as its antithesis, and then it synthesizes those views that says, oh, actually, I believe in the concept of God, meaning essentially I'll take what was good, metaphorical, liminal, orienting, and inspiring, spiritual, and I'll believe and orient towards that rather than sort of the concretized versions that people then say we know to be true through revelation and authority, even though science is like maybe not.
Right.
So my technical religion is this as an agnostic, atheistic syntheist.
Now, is that a thing? Are you the only one? Is a group?
Oh no, I'm not the only
okay.
one. No, there's a little movement. I mean, there are a wide variety of movements that are very similar to this ballpark. My friend Alexander Bard actually authored a book called Syntheism. He's a philosopher in Europe. And he didn't coin the term, but he revitalized it.
You had him on the podcast.
He's a
did
fascinating.
You not?
I did. I had him on the podcast, and he's got a vision for the future called the Dark Renaissance. My vision for the future is Enlightenment 2.0. We actually had a conversation about that. But we both, he wrote a book called Syntheism, Creating God in the Internet Age. Oh, wow. And I was blown away by how similar it was to the Tree of Knowledge and garden stuff that I built, which is basically, hey, the internet age is actually bringing us into two, very liminal space. You can, and meaning liminal when I use the word sort of mystical, uncertain, potentially scary and confusing, horror on the one hand, but awe and beauty and wonder on the other. There's an opportunity to kind of relate to this in a particular way. And if we do take our ultimate concerns and cultivate them as shared values in a particular way, then I think this can end well. And if we don't, well, maybe end less well.
Yeah. So your definition of where you sit belief wise might complicate the statement, but I've always been, I guess maybe impressed is the right word, or just fascinated or whatever, with folks that they don't believe in they don't believe in. Maybe they're not strictly religious. They don't have a God. They're atheist, even agnostic. I feel like this statement's more towards someone who maybe is a self-proclaimed atheist. And I know plenty of them that, in my opinion, I always wondered why. I have a lot of atheists that are not just hedonistic, and they're not just we're only going to be here for 90 years, 100 years if you're lucky. We're just going to go and just dissolve into the earth. No one's going to know anything after they die. There's not going to be any sense of consciousness. So why not just live and just be as selfish as you can, feel as best as you can, be hedonistic, just be extremely selfish. And I find that to be not the case for a lot of proclaimed atheists or for other folks that identify, there is this desire for a unifying moral compass and just general the things that you used to hear were only possible if you knew God, right? So it's just always interesting to me where in my head I'm thinking, well, if I was, because I use God a lot of times for my relationship with God as, sort of I don't know, a moral compass / maybe, like,
Sure.
hey, he's looking, he's watching, right?
Yep.
Now, maybe that's my own version of what some of you folks, how you guide yourself. But I look at it as like I close my eyes and I see this physical thing. I don't know really what it looks like, but he's watching. I don't want to piss him off. He loves me. I'm trying to do the right thing. And sometimes it's like I don't want to piss him off because I don't want to make him angry. But the other time it's like, well, I just want him to do, I want to do the right thing by him. And it's
sure. Well, one thought exercise that you could have, because I certainly, I a lot in my atheistic, but most of the time I became a syntheist. And again, it really didn't change my metaphysics. It just changed my attitude about like how to think about my values.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my gosh, I do believe in the concept of God. So my general worldview has been pretty similar, although the attitude changes when you adopt this view. But I will say, so, one thought experiment as well, as many people used to ask me, religious people. I live in Stewartstraff, Virginia. It's a very, very religious Southern Virginia town. And so we encounter this and we're like, well, why? I engaged in a public debate with a young earth creationist fundamentalist, in a high school, and people came up to me in that context about, yeah, why aren't you just like hedonistic and selfish and all of this other stuff? It's like, and I was like, and I asked them, I was like, so if God decided it was moral for you to rape and torture people, would you? Would that be then fine? It's like, or would you basically be like, actually, I'm not sure that would, just if God said that was moral, something inside of me says, I don't know that I would agree with that. Okay.
Right.
Now, certainly you can say, well, God, many times in the past, you say, well, God wanted slavery, and then people will certainly do that. They'll use that as a justification. But if you actually check yourself and say the only reason I do moral things is because I didn't get in heaven, okay? And that if God's valuation was totally different, I would totally fall in line with whatever valuation he would have. I find that most people actually have an intuitive sense about care, about, we know that our human nature, while it can be pretty selfish on the one hand, is unbelievably giving on the other hand. Our core primate nature is actually a very pro-social nature in a very particular way, okay? There's a great book, Humanity, that just speaks to this. Be aware that your nature is not just to care for your body, okay? Your nature is actually much more distributed. If you want, my story just, I'm 5 years old. I happened to watch one of those videos back in the day and one video was on TV. Poor kids in Africa, I watched that video. I ran up. I was, 5, 6 years old and handed them my little piggy bank to my dad and said, send that to them, I was like, watching those kids with flies on their eyes and being hungry hurt me, okay? Hurt my soul, And that's because human nature actually is oriented towards that. I didn't need to really learn that. I didn't have my parents teach me that. I'm just one of the majority of people who actually sees somebody who's in pain who feels like I can do something about it. And you will feel the pain and want to help them because you have a heart.
Right.
And we call people that don't have that sociopaths.
Right.
So, most of us really feel that.
Right.
Now you have to
empathy.
You have to rein empathy into sympathy, into altruism or affiliation. Actually, it's just a tendency of affiliation. And you have to be careful because obviously if I then said, oh my God, every kid who needs my altruism and affiliation gets it, then all of a sudden you distribute yourself and you can't do that. So you then have to learn, wait a minute, I can't just love others. I have to protect myself. And then I have to decide who I love because it's not infinite. Right? And we could say, Christ, agape, or whatever, love is infinite, but it's actually, in terms of investment, time, energy, you have to choose, And because of that, then you have to start reining yourself in. And it is the case that we're also power hungry at times. We're also very selfish at times. We have all of these potentials in us, and they're part of our nature. They will be released in certain kinds of developmental situation contexts. But I think that we should know that our structure is actually very oriented toward care and giving, and that can be elicited in many, many different contexts. Yeah. And that's not inconsistent with saying we're selfish. It just means both and. We have both those potentials very much.
Your example as a 5-year-old, and the example you walk through, it actually it's the bipolar opposite of some of the Christian tradition, where it's proven that, hey, we're born sinful. We are born, and children do not need be taught how to be bad, how to hit their sisters and brothers, how to steal, how to just whatever and it's the message that you have to be born again. You have to find a relationship with God. Christians call it to be born again. So it really is the sort of, and I'm bringing this up sort of just because it's like I said earlier, you guys are paddling upstream with some of the concepts, because there's so many of these things out there that are in direct contrast with some of the concepts. Eventually, hopefully the right one will win out. But I think it's interesting. I'm more like you. I mean, I classify myself as a super empath. It's actually a thing now. I've read it. It's like, okay, I can feel the pain of others more dramatically than a lot of people, and it's actually helped me understand why when my daughter or son, was crying up in his room, I'm maybe not the best person to be the disciplinarian in that case. When they deserve to be up in the room because they're sad because they did something wrong, it hurts. It just hurts me, and I have to leave. Like, my wife and I have actually had to have those conversations. Where for her, she loves our children more than life itself, but she doesn't feel, it doesn't hurt her. Like, I actually get sweats and anxiety. My blood pressure goes up just because I'm hearing my child, and they're just upset in their room. They're not hurt. They're just upset, and I just can't take it. So it's like that. I always thought it was kind of more of each one of us is sort of individualistic in terms of our empathy versus you get sociopaths on one end, the super empaths on the other. But it's an interesting approach where, yeah, you're right. There is, I don't know where I land on it, but I feel like generally we're good humans. I think generally we don't want to see other people in pain. I feel
we certainly can be readily channeled into being good. Okay, we can be pretty channeled into being bad.
Yeah.
Okay, so but we're channeled behavioral investors and influencers, meaning that we're seeking vectors, and if your mountain's a structure a particular way, we can flow down a very judgmental, cruel, brutal stream. And if that's where our investment, influence, and justification can take us, we can also flow into an unbelievably giving, caring stream. It is our natures to have that potential to be able to do both and evolve into either position, because our lives, our ancestral lives, have historically been filled with both loving kindness and brutal competition, and we are prepared for both of those fields, and we have structures that afford us
love the
capacity.
tribe, protect the tribe, right? And then the other tribe is thinking the same thing, and then when they both tribes meet, they violence occurs between them because they're both loving themselves, right? It's like in protecting their own tribe. Yeah, it's and that was one of the questions I had, is all this that we're talking through. What have we? I mean, what part has evolution had in this? I mean, all these things can be traced through to pretty much either. It always goes down to survival, right? Something.
Well, certainly you're right. It depends on what your worldview is, but from my vantage point, we're evolved primates. Okay, so that's a very, it's a pretty clear version of reality. I like to say that we are both persons and primates. Okay, humans are both persons and primates. And that's a way to understand us, our human mental behavior. So the primate side of us, and this is not any way novel, but it's a particular way of framing it that I like to emphasize. So the primate side of us is an investing creature. It looks out, it has drives about what it wants to do. In fact, I think Plato does a pretty good job. He basically says, hey, you have your core animalistic drives in your gut and your loin. Okay, Freud picks up on this. All right, and so those are the things that you want to basically be like, hey, you want to eat, you want to feed, you want to flee, you want to f. There you go. Those are, and then you have your heart. So then you move up into your body, and metaphorically you have your heart. This is the relational world. This is pre-person. This is something that we have primates. Okay, so for example, my wife. She, one of the oldest relational primate dynamics is mother-offspring. It's one of the most archaic relationships. When she gave birth to our first child, okay, soon as that birth happened, my wife, boom, and I went from number 1 to number 2, and boom, it's like, there it is. She had one bullet and one gun. There wouldn't think of me any doubt. Okay, it's like, all right. And so the whole transformation. So she felt and protected and held and was just transformed by that at basically every aspect of her cell. And that is the origin, by the way, of love, is really mother offspring, and then nature builds off of that. It spreads it, and so our heart then is this thing that wants to connect on the one level, but wants to protect. Okay, so it's connect and protect. We want relational value. We want to be known and valued and have social influence. That's the fundamental core. So are you known and valued by important people? All right. To be valued, hey, they love you. Do they know you at your core, and will they value you if they know you? If you have a network of important people that know and value you through your core, you'll be in good shape. Okay. At the psychotherapy level, I see people who feel that they have limited social influence relative to what they should have. That means their basic instrumental capacity, their capacity for attention, they're not influencers, so they're pushed that way. Or if they are influencers, they feel like they're faking it and they're not influencers in the way they want to be. Okay. If you actually have social influence and are loved and known by the people around you and have a sphere of influence, well, at a relational world level, that's pretty damn good. You know? And then your soul is filled. Okay. Now that knowledge about us as primates is really key, because what we built in the capital labor society is we built it all based on instrumentalism. Instrumentalism is, hey, we will gain power through money and capital, and we'll create hierarchies that move people based on how well they perform and shift them around, which is all instrumental influence, which is crucial, but it's not knowing one's soul. And in fact, you can be an influencer without being known at all. In terms of the core of your soul. And so what the theory says is actually we should build societies where people's core souls are actually given the opportunity to be seen, known, and valued. That's really the outcome that you want. If you want a good, healthy primate, human hominid primate, you know and value them through development. Okay, and we don't do that. And talk about social media. If you rail on social media, like social media is horrible, and they're all influencers. You know, you want to grab attention, you gotta like, but you may just be putting up a total persona to attract attention that may not speak to. Chances are, it doesn't speak to your soul in a particular way, or it may well not. And then you feel like you get loved and get lots of likes because you say something weird, and then everybody likes you, so then you feel compelled. If you're an adolescent girl trying to navigate your relational value that way, it's like drinking 4 things of vodka every day. I mean, it's not the right way of developing. And we have set up a system then, so that just gives you an idea about, well, okay, if we had the right calibration about our natures, we could then cultivate the right kind of relational networks that afford them good calories, good relating calories, as opposed to bad relating calories. And we've set up a pretty bad relating calorie system.
Yeah. In fact, I just did a podcast with Dr. DeMartini, John DeMartini. Was it last one or a couple times ago? And I've really been following him ever since. And he was really, he really got me thinking about. And his big platform is, you need to find your inner value and do what inspires you, right? Do you need to be always inspired, and it all comes down to what you find and define as your core values, right? And if you basically surround your activities with that which you find most meaningful based on your core values, that's the only way to true fulfillment. And everything you just said with the social media and the influencers, I would argue, there's a lot of them that do check that box and actually are. I would say he's one of them, right? He's truly inspired by doing what he does. So he's living the talk, right? I think folks like you are. I'm probably some hybrid. I don't know. I'm got to work on myself here, but I think that's hard because a lot of us have. You need to make money, you need to have jobs, and maybe you need to do things, but what you just articulated about, I think 80% of them are probably fake, to use your words, right? They're not doing, and not, their platform is not based on their core values, right? It's not, they're just trying to get likes, and the whole feedback system of the TikToks and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, it rewards clicks. It doesn't reward, are you in line with your true values? And unfortunately, that's a bad cycle. I mean,
that's right. So I definitely appreciate that. In fact, there are 3 real domains of human consciousness that you want to be aligned. One is the core primate self. So, and then that generates your intuitive, what Carl Rogers called your organismic valuing process. That's what the other guy undoubtedly is speaking to in terms of your core value. Then you have your ego narrator, and you want alignment between your core primate intrinsic valuing system that sees, feels, acts, and then your narrator that tells the story of that, and then your persona. And the persona is what you are to other people and how you try to manage your public. And those are the 3 domains: persona, ego, and experiential self or core self. And if you get good flow between those domains that are coherent and integrated in a relational world that loves you for it, well, I'll show you some is really fulfilled.
Yeah.
You get bad flow between those fucking things, well, you'll be in my office for therapy.
I don't know what 75% of us are. Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
it's amazing.
It's a tough time mentally for us.
It
We
is.
don't know. We don't really know how to create a structure, and this is what's sad from my vantage point as a psychologist. We actually have lots of wisdom. If we could cut through all the noise, there's an enormous amount of wisdom in my discipline that we could extract. We have a lot of wealth. If we knew how to calibrate the structure rate, we could tweak a number of things and really allow a lot more mental flourishing than we're seeing, because we're seeing a lot of mental suffering, and it's one of the things that aches my empathetic heart.
Yeah. I mean, so we'll wrap it up with this question, because I think it's a good one. I mean, I love, that's why I love talking to you. We thought we want to talk about some blog, but we ended up talking about everything but, and it was awesome. So I appreciate that fluidity.
Good.
But so everything. So I think we're on the same page that, a lot, like you said, your office is always full. I mean, I think you'd probably have a dream where you as a clinician don't have to sit and listen to people, try to help them try to become more mentally happy, right? I think you'd love that if no one needed it, truly. You have to find another job or whatever. But so what is the core of the problem? Because I don't feel like it's getting better. I have kids that are in 4 or 5 years will be teenagers, so I know a lot of friends that had their children are going through the teenage years with social media and all this stuff. I mean, there's so much. It just seems like there's no handbook to being a parent. There's no so if I'm a parent listening and I want, say, my child to grow up and be more in sync with their values and not be, programmed to enter the rat race of clicks and likes and Monday through Friday and a bigger house and more money and whatever is causing us to, in my opinion, be pulled away from our intrinsic values. What can we do as parents, and what do we do to our children? How can we teach them, so hopefully they'll. I wish I was taught this stuff when I was young. I mean, maybe it wouldn't go from one of my head, but I don't know what thoughts.
Well, that's a great question. In fact, my identity has shifted so that now I'm actually out of the clinic room and now definitely kind of see myself as a meta psychologist and just trying to get the narrative to people, because I really think this is not a one-on-one deal. I think it's societal. It's understanding our worldviews and society values and understanding what they could be and educating the collective rather than one-on-one. As important as that is, and I'm a lifelong clinician, so I deeply respect that, but really that my life has taken me in such that I'm actually not.
Are you trying to establish a system by which clinicians can maybe plug into and implement on a one-on-one basis, maybe?
By which we should upgrade our values, upgrade our worldview, our understanding of what's real, and good, and then from understanding that, orient then towards the cultivation of those things that allow that to flourish, as opposed to the things that don't. Now, and this gets back, unfortunately, I don't have any specific one, do this. Okay, I'd be very suspicious of do this, because you have to, if you understand the systemic nature of what we're facing, the idea that there would be a single flip of a switch, it's like you could reduce it to one thing, that would be silly, because it's a very, very complicated, dynamic, constantly changing problem. Okay. To be aware that there's a problem, okay, and then to be aware, to go in developmental search, okay, of the kinds of transformations that are fulfilling, to me is key. That's the first thing. So it's sort of like, hey, I'm not sure. In fact, I'm actually quite confident that the structure that we built is not really well, or there are many, at the very least, there are many weaknesses of the structure that we built generationally. So it's like what we built just as the default, I'm going to take this for granted, okay, and this will work out fine.
Yeah.
I think that the idea that everything will just work out fine in the next 50 years and we'll just keep doing what we're doing and then is essentially ostrich head in the sand.
Yeah, like we spoke about earlier with COVID challenged that reality.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so then the issue is when the kids are, I mean, my family had to deal with this. I sort of had this awakening in 2016 where I really was like, took out the landscape and started wandering around going, global civilization collapse. My family had a fucking, my 13-year-old daughter's like, what the hell's my crazy dad talking about? And that's not necessarily ideal. I can't recommend that. But it is the case that at least the system that I, am a part of became aware and, had some reflection. I'm at least offering this. Now, you can't be controlling either. That's the freedom. So it's a hugely complicated deal. Yeah. To me, there are a couple of key pieces. Okay. So one is what we talked about. It's a pretty key piece. Relational value. Does the person feel known and valued? Okay. And then what gets off on that? Well, the relationship between the heart, the head, and the relational world. That's key cross development. Okay. So, I mean, if you have that as sort of like, hey, that is the intersection of, heart, head, and relational world. And how do I cultivate a trajectory that's going to allow for good, coherent flow that's fulfilling across these domains? Okay. That's another basic position that we want to kind of, don't believe, or it's a huge experiment and a lot of good evidence that just the normal way of being is going to be, a lot of bad calories. Okay. Yeah. So I just wrote a note to my kids based on some of the listserv stuff. I was like, for every half hour you spend on TikTok is probably like smoking a cig for your mind. Okay. They hate cigarettes. I never smoke a cig. So I was like, well, but probably a half hour on TikTok's like a cig.
Yeah. Good analogy.
It's like, my God, what are you talking about, Dad? Like, well, probably. So be aware of what, how to be open to the idea that, get feedback about what's fulfilling for you. The last thing I give in just sort of generic lifestyles, when I look at somebody's lifestyle as a clinician, I look at sort of the 4 quick part summary I look at is, hey, do they love, work, and play with purpose? Okay, so love, work, play with purpose as sort of like the guiding lodestone for naturalistic fulfillment. And so if you have a sense of harmony between your head, heart, and relational world, and you love, work, play with purpose, those are good guideposts for fulfillment.
Some excellent advice, Greg. Appreciate it. That was kind of a selfish question too, because I'm starting to see like my kids. I'm starting to see them and their friends are a little old. I'm like, teenage years aren't too far away, and it's, I'm not prepared, but none of us are. But you just want to.
Right. Well, mine's coming out of the teenage years, so it was certainly bumpy at times. Yeah. Although ultimately
you haven't died. You still look good. So everything's
okay.
You're still flying.
I haven't died, and I just sent my daughter off to her Vanderbilt to get her doctorate in biomedical engineering. So
really?
Check that box.
Congrats, Mom and Dad. Then well done. Yeah, awesome, excellent. Well, Greg, let's wrap it up. So you started the podcast. How's that going?
Good. I have many, for me, my own personal little garden. I talk about the garden. It's a metaphor for, but then a local garden, global garden. My little garden's great. I've been able to make the beauty of Zoom for us intellectuals who are, kind of surfing the wave of complexity here out on the edges. There are a lot of, it affords me an opportunity to connect with people. So really, I was able to set up podcasts, talk with I've made a network of a real wonderful, fascinating people doing interesting things. So now I just set up an opportunity to talk to them, and people listen in, not in any tremendous numbers by any stretch, but I don't care. I'm not there for an influence. I'm just sharing my narrative.
No, exactly. And that's good. How it will grow when you just stick to what you want to do and don't even look at the numbers. Just do what you love to do, and then the content will be good. But
it's fulfilling for me, and that's where I keep my focus.
Yeah. Any new books coming out, or what else you working on that we should know about?
I'm 80% done with the book called Problem Psychology and a New Vision for Its Solution. So my professional life's work is to orient us towards what's called the problem of psychology. That turns out that nobody knows what the F psychology is, which is a funny little thing. And I figured out a way that perhaps allows us to clarify scientifically what it means, and then use that for both psychological practice, for everyday folk psychology, and for philosophy. And then that becomes part of a coherent worldview that I think, kind of be that religion that's not a religion kind of deal. Yep. That's the vision and hope.
Yep. You have a name for it yet?
Yeah, the book's called The Problem of Psychology.
Oh, it is? Okay.
And a New Vision for Its Solution.
Got it. I'm sorry you said that. Okay, got it.
The Problem of Psychology and a New Vision for Its Solution.
You said you're 80%
and then, I got maybe more than that, because actually I had to realize that my word length was going over, so I had to shrink a couple chapters and then jam some stuff together. Yeah. But hopefully by the end of the year, I will have sent that off to the publisher.
Neat. Okay.
So.
All right. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it. This was great. As always.
Hey, man. Always enjoy talking with you, Vinny. I
Absolutely.
appreciate you having me on.